Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be taking a wander in the haunted woods, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Our farm has been in the family for generations. Growing up, I constantly heard stories from my grandmother, my uncle, and my great-uncle about the man in the ravines. They spoke of him the way you'd mention a difficult neighbour, and I always thought it was complete nonsense. But according to them, he would show up deep in the low valleys near the tree line where the light would never quite reach him. He's a tall man with red hair wearing an old grey coat and always carrying a brown bag and a rifle. They never described him as aggressive or particularly unsettling, just someone who didn't belong there and always seemed to appear. But one year we leased part of the property to a group of cops for hunting season. They were experienced guys and not the type to scare easy. After their first weekend out there, they returned visibly shaken. They said they'd run into a man deep in the woods near one of the ravines. He'd stepped out from behind the trees without making a sound, very tall, red hair, grey coat, brown bag, and in his hands what looked like an old muzzle-load rifle. And he gave them a chilling message. "You boys need to get the hell out of here, or you won't make it back to where you came from." They assumed it was some local trespasser messing with them, but they swore the man didn't move like an ordinary person. He just stood there, watching, like they were the ones out of place. They never hunted on our land again. Years passed, and I still treated the stories like folklore. Then one summer I was working hay with my uncle. It was brutally hot. I'm talking too much time in the sun, sunstroke kind of hot. I was stacking square bales onto the wagon, half delirious from exhaustion and heat, and honestly sort of moving on autopilot. I bent down, grabbed another bale, turned and froze. Because standing at the edge of the field, no more than 50 yards away, was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered with bright red hair, wearing a grey coat that looked completely wrong for the weather we were experiencing. In one hand, there was a worn brown bag, and in the other a long rifle with dark wood and metal that caught the sun strangely. He wasn't doing anything, simply staring at us. I remember yelling for my uncle, and we both turned towards the exact spot where the man had been. And we were met with an empty field. There was no sound of anyone walking away, and there's nowhere he could have gone without us seeing him leave. My uncle didn't say much. He just gave me the look. I suppose the best way to put it is the look after a skeptic who vehemently denies something happens, finally has it happen to them, and then you become a believer too. Years later, my cousin started digging into the property records, tracing ownership of the surrounding farms, mostly out of curiosity and family history. And that's when it got weird. Because after the Civil War, a Union soldier had been granted a large tract of land, right where our farm sits now. Nearly 300 acres, in fact. The records included an old photograph attached to some of the archived documents, and my cousin showed it to me. I didn't need him to say anything. Tall, red hair, severe expression, and in the photo hanging from his hand was a small brown satchel. It was the same guy. The one who everyone in my family had been describing for decades. I have always tried to stay reasonable about paranormal stuff. I grew up believing there are things in this world we don't fully understand, because I've had experiences I still can't explain. But I'm not the kind of person who jumps straight to, "It definitely was a ghost or demon." Anyway, at the time this happened, I was living in a condo in suburban Colorado, right at the edge of a huge stretch of protected open space and wilderness. The area was strange, in a way that a lot of Colorado suburbs are. You have rows of condos and parking lots on one side, then endless black hills and undeveloped land on the other. I had only been living there for about a month and a half when the first incident happened. I woke up suddenly at 1:45 in the morning to the sound of a scream. It sounded distant, perhaps from another housing complex or somewhere near the open space beyond the parking lots, but it was loud enough to snap me awake instantly, and it lasted for about 4 seconds. Exactly 1 second later, the scream came at the same volume, length, and pitch. This was what disturbed me most. It didn't sound natural. Human screams tend to waver and people lose their breath, but this sounded almost mechanical in its consistency, almost like it was the exact same sound played twice over. This caused me to, of course, sit up in bed. I was completely frozen, seeing if more screaming would echo through the night, but nothing did. I felt genuinely afraid to move for several minutes after that. My first thought was that maybe someone outside was hurt, but the more I replayed the sound in my head, the less it sounded like fear or pain. But the more I replayed the sound in my head, the less it sounded like a cry of fear or pain. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it sounded emotionless. I considered calling the police, but what was I supposed to tell them? That I heard 2 screams somewhere far away with no direction? Eventually I convinced myself it had to be an animal. Over the next few days I started searching online for wilderness sounds common in Colorado, be it foxes, owls, mountain lions, bobcats, or coyotes. Some of them were unsettlingly close, especially fox screams, but none matched perfectly. Most animal sounds fluctuated naturally. The thing I heard had sounded identical both times, like a repeated recording. Eventually, I stopped thinking about it as much. Then, 2 months later, it happened again at the exact same time. 1:45 a.m. I remember that because the sound woke me up instantly, and I checked my phone out of instinct the moment my eyes opened. The scream came once, there was a brief pause, and then the exact same scream ran out again. The moment I heard it, my stomach dropped, because I knew immediately it was the same sound from before. This time I got out of bed and looked outside. The parking lot was empty, the sidewalks were empty, and no lights were on. There was no discernible movement anywhere nearby. I barely slept the rest of the night. About a month after that, something else happened that bothered me even more. I had taken my dog outside around 4:45 in the morning, before work. It was still dark out, and my dog normally barked at absolutely everything. But that morning he walked out unusually slow and stayed pressed against my leg, which is very strange behavior for him. That's when I saw something crossing the far side of the parking lot. At first I thought it was just another person wearing dark clothes, but almost immediately my brain started rejecting that because the proportions looked wrong. To describe it properly, this person was absurdly tall. If I had to estimate, I'd say at least 9 feet, although now I hate saying it because it sounds ridiculous. But it towered over the parked cars as it moved towards the open space beyond the complex. The strangest part was the lack of color. It didn't look like a silhouette wearing black clothing, it looked completely black itself, like a cutout in reality. I stopped walking completely as I watched it. My dog stared at it without barking once, then immediately started to pull back towards the condo, with its low, nervous body posture one I'd never seen before. The figure crossed a drainage ditch and disappeared into open space. I stood there for a while trying to convince myself that my eyes must have been playing tricks on me, but there's no way my dog could have seen something and reacted that way if it hadn't been real. I didn't tell anyone. Then came the night that finally pushed me into genuinely questioning what was happening. I woke up at 1:45 a.m. This scream came, and then again. My dog, who never woke up in the middle of the night unless something was wrong, immediately climbed off the bed and began pacing towards the door to go outside. I honestly almost refused because I was so unsettled, but eventually I figured maybe hearing the noise had just disturbed him too. Outside, the whole complex felt dead silent. My dog barely used the bathroom. Instead, he kept scanning the darkness around the parking lot and the tree line leading towards the open space. I hurried us back inside. A few minutes later, while lying in bed trying to calm down, I thought I heard something faint outside. Then the screams happened again. This was the first time it happened twice in one night. I finally dropped a message in the neighborhood group chat asking if anyone had heard it, but the replies didn't come until morning. Most said no, but one neighbor messaged me privately and said, "This neighborhood is interesting." I tried getting them to elaborate, but they never really did. Later that morning, I called a relative of mine who studies folklore and spiritual traditions. I explained the repeated screams, the timing, the consistency, all of it. Oh, and the black figure I'd seen crossing the parking lot. He asked if I had ever heard of a banshee. At that point, I only knew the word from video games and fantasy movies, and I spent the rest of the day researching folklore, with the unease increasingly growing on me. Even now, years later, I still don't know what I heard, but I know it's real, be it banshee or not. Back when I was in college, there was this guy in our friend group who everyone called Crazy Alex. That wasn't just a joking nickname either. Alex genuinely scared people sometimes, even the ones who liked him. He had this strange way of carrying himself, and you could never really fully tell whether he was doing something elaborate for attention or if he actually believed some of the things he said. Most of the time we treated it like harmless insanity, because honestly college campuses are full of eccentric people and Alex was entertaining to be around. He'd shown up at parties, already talking about demons, spirits, aliens, secret knowledge, or the obsession of the week, and most of us would just laugh it off while drinking. The thing was, every now and then, Alex would say or do something that none of us could explain. Sometimes in the middle of conversations, his eyes would suddenly roll back into his head, and he'd make this awful screeching sound that sounded way too raw to be fake. He claimed he was the Reaper who could steal souls from people. Other times he talked about being abducted by aliens and showed us this bizarre, blurry photograph on his phone that honestly did not look staged, even though it probably was. Once, while a group of us were hiking in an area where no one ever got cell service, Alex suddenly received a phone call. His phone was the only one that had signal whatsoever, and I remember all of us checking our own screens because we thought we'd finally wandered into range of a tower, but every other phone still had 0 bars except his. He answered casually, listened for a few seconds, and then looked up and said with a grin, "It's Lucifer." That kind of thing happened often enough that you eventually stopped questioning it. What made it harder to completely dismiss Alex was the fact that sometimes he knew things that he had no business in knowing whatsoever. After my grandmother died, he mentioned details about her death that I had never told anyone at school. Not vague cold-reading nonsense either. I'm talking specific details. Other friends claimed he had done similar things with them, and no one had a good explanation for it. Most of us landed somewhere between believing he was mentally ill and wondered whether there was something genuinely wrong surrounding him. Either way, people kept hanging out around him because college students are drawn towards chaos, especially when they're bored and living in what was already considered one of the most haunted campuses in the States. So our college was surrounded by this enormous forest that basically became an extension of campus life. Students built little forts and hangout spots deep in the woods where people would go to drink, smoke and hook up and avoid campus security. Some of them were surprisingly elaborate, with tarps, scavenged furniture, lanterns, graffitis, all kinds of interesting creations. There was one main fort our friend group used all the time, which was hidden far enough into the woods that you had to know exactly where it was to find it. The place already had an unsettling atmosphere at night. The forest around campus was known for weird stories long before Alex ever came along, and even during the day there were areas where the woods felt strangely silent. About 2 weeks before the 2016 election, Alex started acting more unstable than usual. He became obsessed with the idea that the world was changing and that something massive was coming. Well, one night at the fort, he announced completely seriously that he had opened a portal to hell there in the woods. He said he had done it to usher in the Antichrist. Most of us laughed because it sounded exactly like the kind of dramatic nonsense Alex always said. But the mood that night still felt weird. I remember him drawing symbols on the ground near the center of the fort while mumbling things that none of us understood. Danica, one of my friends, later swore he drew a full pentagram in the dirt surrounded by candles and animal bones he'd apparently dragged out earlier. At the time, we all thought it was edgy roleplay garbage from a guy who'd lost his grip on reality. But then, things started happening. That same day Alex claimed he opened a portal, the campus suddenly went into lockdown for reasons no one fully explained to us at the time, but everyone spread rumors regarding it. Some people said there had been threats made online. Others said police were searching the woods for someone. Whatever the reason actually was, the timing unnerved us because Alex immediately started acting as though he had caused it. He kept saying things like, "It's already starting," with this weird satisfied look on his face that made everyone deeply uncomfortable. Then about a week later, one of the guys in our extended friend group died by taking his own life right outside the fort. I'll call him Kenny, because I still don't feel right using his real name. His death obviously shook everyone because no one saw it coming. None of his closest friends knew him to be suicidal. His girlfriend said he'd seemed normal. Obviously, that doesn't mean someone can't still be struggling internally, but at the time, the suddenness of it all shattered our entire group. The fact that it happened directly outside the fort where Alex had been ranting about portals and demons only made everyone feel worse. Campus security ended up tearing down the fort afterwards, probably because they knew students were gathering there all the time. But Alex became fixated on the idea that Kenny's death was connected to the portal. He insisted the portal needed to stay open and started acting excited whenever the subject came up, which honestly frightened a lot of us enough that we slowly stopped talking to him altogether. Years passed, and I mostly tried not to think about any of it. Looking back now, the logical explanation is probably that Alex was severely mentally ill, and that we were a bunch of impressionable college kids feeding into his delusions because we thought it was entertaining. But every now and then I still think about the strange things surrounding him that never made sense. The impossible phone call, the details he knew about people's lives, the atmosphere in the wood itself. Recently I was telling my boyfriend the story for the first time, and the second I finished he immediately said, half joking but still serious enough to unsettle me, "You should go close the portal." That's what reopened all of this in my mind. Danica still remembers exactly where the fort stood and where Alex supposedly drew the pentagram. She says she could walk right back to the location easily. Part of me thinks the entire idea is ridiculous and dangerous, because obsessing over this stuff only gives power to old fears. Another part of me remembers the way those woods felt at night. I don't know whether I believe in portals to hell rationally, I probably don't, but there's still a part of me that feels deeply uneasy about going back to that place, given its history and everything. I lived near the Blue Ridge Mountains, one of the furthest ends of the Appalachian Mountains, about 10 minutes away from Jasper, Georgia. I was in the 3rd grade when I lived there, and my school was entirely fenced in. Behind the metal gate, I remember there was a large section of woods, then a field, and lastly our playground and school. We usually had, at the least, 3 teachers watching us when we played outside. We weren't allowed near the fence whatsoever after 2 kids, Brian and Colin, hopped the fence and started to walk around the woods until the teachers noticed, and everyone was sent inside until the teachers could find them. And Colin was in my class. And when I say he was downright terrified, I mean it. He didn't say what happened, but less than a month later he switched schools. After that, we weren't even allowed in the field near the woods. Another thing that would happen near the fence / in the woods would be the noises. Though it wasn't a very thick forest, it was big, and you couldn't see much of anything in there, and you could faintly hear one of three things, be it motorbikes, or a very hard to describe sound, something akin to what you'd hear in a car shop, like a low hum of machinery, or footsteps. I hated those words. I was part of the group that didn't have anyone to pick them up either from school or from the bus stop, until about an hour after school would end, so I joined the after-school program, or the ASP, and we were usually watched by young teachers' aides and such. Usually we'd be in the computer room, but when it was nice out, we'd be outside, but we go to the older kids' playgrounds further from the woods. We stayed at the basketball court, and the other kids would play basketball with the aides, and I didn't play, so I'd sit to the side looking out into the forest or keeping score for the other kids. And as I stared into the forest that one day, my ears began to ring, and I saw the fence begin to shake, as if something were climbing it, even though it was a still summer day with not much wind at all. I got the chills and looked away, and the moment I did, everything stopped. And then the aide called for us to go inside, and we stopped looking at the woods. I believe something was drawing kids to those woods because I have tons of stories of kids sneaking off during recess, staying outside and lingering near the fence. One kid called D had snuck off during the extra recess our class earned, meaning there was only one teacher rather than 3 watching us. D was missing for 15 minutes. Our whole class looked everywhere except the woods, and 15 minutes later we found her sitting in the corner next to the side entrance. But that was practically in plain sight of the class of people looking for 15 minutes. Someone would have seen her multiple times, but she swore up and down that she'd been there. But she looked freaked out, and started sobbing the moment we found her. She composed herself and brushed it off, as if she'd just gotten into a disagreement with Quinn. Nothing about any of that made sense. We were all just playing freeze tag together, and sure, they had bickered a bit, but they were always bickering. So yeah, I have a lot of these stories from my neighborhood. Some of my grandparents' house right against the Appalachian Mountains, and some from the woods near my house, and even more school stories. I guess things are just weird out there. When I was 6 years old, I got lost for 2 days. This happened in the countryside while I was spending all summer with my grandmother. I cannot remember how much from this time I was missing, but I remember what they told me at the time. I used to sleep in the room with another 4 kids. One was my brother and the other 2 were my cousins. Another 3 people slept in the house, my grandmother, aunt, and uncle. Sunday morning, my grandparents and my uncle woke up very early to feed the animals and prepare for lunch. At 7, when they came to wake us up and all go to church, I was not there. My shoes were there, and only the t-shirt and shorts I was wearing were missing. They called the police, and my parents, who were living 700 kilometers away. They searched with dogs but found no leads far from the house. After 2 days, I was found in the forest, about 7 miles away by some hunters. They took me to the police station in the next village, and they brought me to the other police station in the village where my grandmother lived. I was not dirty or hungry or even scared. I had a book in my hand, and my clothes were too small for me. They had to cut off the shirt I was wearing because I couldn't get it off. I was the same, but my clothes were no longer my size. Most disturbing was the fact that I was wearing shoes when they found me in the woods. Yet I had my original shoes at home. A few years ago, my nephew became a police officer and found the files, and he sent them to me. This is pretty much what I had told the police at the time. I told them that I came from the school, but I was too young for school. I told them that they taught me to be me. They taught me who I am and how I am. I was sleeping in a room with many kids, boys and girls, and we were eating vegetables. On the windows, we saw only water like underwater, but there were no fish. All the teachers there looked the same, and we just called them teacher. Every child had been given a name and had to learn about their new life and family. Apparently they showed us on screens pictures of the families we would join. The book in my hand was printed with photos of my family, close relatives, family, friends, neighbors, and even the personnel and kids from the daycare where I was going. I knew all the names of those people, but not personal details about any of them. I was in the police station 2 times, and another 3 times they came and questioned me at home. I have a total of 7 hours of questioning on audio tapes. The next part is probably the most unsettling of this story. When my mother came back to my grandmother's house, she said I was not her son. She saw that my birthmark on my left ear was missing. It was a pretty obvious mark that she had refused to have cut at my birth. She made a big deal of it, and even went back to the police with pictures to prove I was not her child and to make them search for me. They didn't take it seriously, but filed a report at the time. My grandmother used to have 3 dogs around the house that did not recognize me anymore, and my uncle was forced to cage them for a while. My parents took me home after 3 weeks, but my mother was not happy about it. There is something else I wanted to add though. After the return home, there was nothing physically wrong with me when they found me. But not long after we returned home, they took me and my brother to the doctor for a routine control before going back to preschool. After the routine control, my mother asked the doctor to check the intervention I had a few months earlier. It was a small intervention in my mouth. I had a tongue tie that was affecting my speech. When he checked, he didn't find anything to prove I had ever had it. The doctor expected not to see any scar, but my tongue tie was much thicker than at the last control, and that usually never changes. There was also a scar on my right foot after I walked on a broken bottle when I was 5, but the scar was no longer there. My mother was convinced it had been a big one, and now it was just gone, along with my birthmark. It is strange because the place where the mark was from the broken bottle should sometimes feel very icy. And strangest of all, I don't have any memories before missing. I don't remember my parents, my brother, my home, my friends. I don't remember the night I went missing at all. My oldest memory is the smell of the wet woods, and every time I get that smell, the image of the forest hits me. I also remember 2 brown horses from hunters who found me. One of the hunters took me on his horse. I was so impressed with how big and strong they were, and I remember the police station. When I came back, my social life and interaction with people was strange. I was speaking only when asked and forgot how to play most of the games I knew. The 2 hunters were questioned. They were in the woods hunting a group of wolves that had come too close to the village. They were paid by the community to do that job, and they found me around 3 kilometers deep in the woods, far away. They believed they'd seen another person with me. They said the person waved at them, and when they started to approach, I was the only one there, standing alone. And they called for the person who had been there to come, but there was no answer, and even though they searched for a while, they never found out who it was. They said they found bare footprints near a creek, about 20 meters further away. They were not my prints because they were too large and I was wearing shoes. They were supposed to be of a woman or maybe a teenager, judging by the size, and they believed it was the woman who they saw. One of them said the book was stuck in my pants, covered by my t-shirt, and another one said he saw it in my hand. 2 years later, my youngest brother was born, and he was born with the same birthmark as me. One day when I was playing with him, my mother said, "My first son used to have the same birthmark as him, 2 small grapes hanging on the left ear." I remember many times she would ask me, "Who are you? Where's my son? Is he okay?" She took care of me, but she was cold. She never attended my graduations, even when I was first in all the classes. When I went to college in another city, she threw away all my stuff back home, and my room has been empty since that day. There are no pictures inside the house of me, only of me before the disappearance. I don't know if that affected the way I am, because sincerely, I was not bothered too much by that. I always felt from that day like I was an intruder, and that I had no need for a home or friend. Upon completing college, I got into the military and became a pilot. I served for 15 years, then quit. The best time for me is flying and boating. I like to be alone and to be quiet. My social skills come alive only when I drink alcohol, and I'm not much of a drinker. I'm not special in any shape or form. I'm living a normal lifestyle. I didn't change the world for better or worse. And yet I have this feeling that I don't belong anywhere. Over the years, I've tried to investigate it myself after my nephew sent me the police files. I asked questions, searched for records, and tried to understand what really happened during those days. But many things are difficult to verify. This happened during the communist period in my country when records were not always transparent and the police worked very differently than today. Some time ago, I visited a hypnotherapist. The visit was not related to this story. My co-worker, who had problems with alcohol consumption, tried to fix it with a hypnotherapist, and after a few weeks he stopped drinking. I totally believed in hypnosis and was a smoker, so decided to try it, more because I was intrigued. I visited the therapist one time but didn't stop smoking, but something else happened. When she called me by my name under hypnosis, this is what happened. Why did you call me that? Okay, how do you want me to call you? Call me by my name. What's your name? B71. Okay. Who gave you this name? The nun. She kept asking about the nun and places for a few questions, and then she stopped the session because she wasn't sure what was happening exactly. The nun was dressed in a dark robe with her hair covered with some kind of hat. She was the one who taught me how to shower, how to dress myself, how to eat, and behave around other people. I didn't go back to the hypnotherapist because I didn't know that person enough and have trust issues with something so personal and unknown even to me. I don't really know what happened, but I believe I'm not related to the family I live with. People have alluded that I'm a changeling. It could have been alien abduction or a government program or the implanting of false memories. I have tried to find out more about this in the last 2 years but have not managed to learn much more. In short, everything is still a mystery, as much it is to me as it is to you. But I hope you enjoyed learning my story. I just wish I understood more of it. I have always lived in rural areas, so I know the difference between normal nighttime sounds and something that immediately feels strange. So let me tell you about where I live. It's a dirt road on a quiet mountainous area, and the nights usually sound the same. Maybe the odd owl, a coyote somewhere in the valley, insects in the brush, and maybe the sound of the odd car here and there. And after enough years out here, you get familiar with these sounds. That is why this started bothering me almost immediately. I work afternoon shifts, so I usually get home somewhere between 11 and midnight. Well, a few weeks ago, right after pulling into my driveway, I heard what sounded unmistakably like someone riding a bicycle down the dirt road outside my house. If you've ever lived near gravel or dirt roads, you'll know the exact sound I mean. There's a distinct rolling crunch to bicycle tires moving over packed dirt that's completely different from a car or footsteps. At first, I barely thought anything of it. I remember standing there as I was about to put the key into the door, thinking it was strange for someone to be riding a bike that late at night in the middle of nowhere. But rural people do odd things sometimes, so I didn't dwell on it for long. What caught my attention was the sound never faded away. Instead of coming down the road and disappearing into the distance, it kept moving back and forth near my property. The strange part was that it somehow always sounded like it was travelling in the same direction. The sound would start louder towards the left side of the road and then grow quieter towards the right, as though someone were passing by. But a minute later it would repeat again from the left side in exactly the same way. I walked further down my driveway, expecting to see someone with a flashlight or maybe the silhouette of someone riding through the dark, but there was absolutely nothing there. I tried to explain it away logically. Sound travels strangely through valleys, especially at night. Coyotes can sound like they're standing right beside your house, when they're actually hundreds of yards away. I figured maybe someone was riding on another road nearby, and the acoustics were bouncing the sound around in weird ways. That explanation held glue for maybe another 30 seconds before I heard breathing mixed in with it. That explanation held for maybe 30 seconds before I heard breathing. The breathing didn't sound human. It wasn't someone out of breath from pedaling up a hill or breathing hard from exercise. No, this sounded wet and animalistic. Sort of like the short, repetitive huffing that dogs make when they're clearing scents from their nose. Every few seconds along the sound of the bicycle tires moving over the dirt. And the second I heard it, every hair on my arm stood on end. I went back inside immediately and locked the door. I was still trying to convince myself that it was probably two unrelated sounds overlapping in a way that my brain interpreted as connected, as humans are good at building patterns out of incomplete information, and told myself that was what was happening. The next night it happened again. Usually the woods around my house are alive with noise after dark, but that night everything had gone silent. And if you've ever spent any time outdoors, you could appreciate just how unsettling that kind of silence feels, because nature is almost never completely quiet unless something has disturbed it. I took my dogs outside before bed and immediately noticed how the silence felt uncomfortable. Then I heard the bicycle again, the rolling crunch of tires moving slowly past the road in front of my property, while that same strange breathing accompanied it. I suddenly became convinced there were some large animals nearby, maybe a mountain lion or elk, moving near the property line. But what unsettled me most was how my dogs reacted, or rather how they didn't react. My German Shepherd barks at absolutely everything: deer, raccoons, people walking too close to the road, you name it. But while I was standing there listening to what sounded like someone circling my driveway on a bike in the middle of the night, both dogs remained quiet. They behaved as though the night around us was empty, and that bothered me a lot. A few nights later, I decided I was tired of being paranoid and wanted to figure out what exactly was causing it. I stood inside my garage with the overhead light behind me, and the door open just enough to look out towards the road. From there I could hear the sounds perfectly. The bicycle was closer than it had ever been before, so close that I became convinced someone was just beyond the end of the driveway where the road curves around the trees. The breathing came with it again. I stared into the darkness, expecting any second to see a shape emerge, but nothing ever did. Just the sound of the wheels rolling over the dirt, and the noise grew louder until I genuinely believed what was making them had stopped directly outside the garage. Every instinct told me to shut the door. The moment I hit the button and the garage door began closing, the sounds stopped instantly. The strangest incident happened during the last full moon. The valley was bright enough that night for me to see clearly across most of the property, and I figured if it happened again, I would finally catch whoever was making the noise. Sure enough, a little after 11, I heard the bicycle again. I stood outside staring so hard into the darkness that my eyes started watering, scanning every tree line and ditch near the road. If there had been a person out there, there was nowhere for them to hide without me seeing them. But there was nothing. The sound persisted, moving slowly back and forth near the property while the breathing followed along beside it. Then, underneath the breathing, I heard something else moving through the grass nearby. Footsteps. No, not footsteps, more like hooves, pressing into the soft ground. I immediately pulled my shepherd closer to me and listened harder. The bicycle sound was still moving along the road while the hoof-like steps circled somewhere off in the nearby darkness. My dog sat calmly beside me without reacting. Meanwhile, my heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. That's the part that I can't explain. If it were an animal, my dog should react. If it were a person, they should react. If something large enough to make hoofbeats was moving around the property, they should absolutely react. But every single time this happened, they did nothing. I will still hear it occasionally around the same time every night. Always the bicycle first. Sometimes the breathing comes with it, sometimes it doesn't, and I still haven't seen anything. But whatever is making that sound keeps coming back. I'm not about to find out if an elk can ride a bicycle now. But what the hell is it? What am I hearing? When I was 17, me and my best friend were walking home in my suburban neighborhood at night. We were angry at each other over teenage stuff, so she was walking about 100 feet ahead of me. She turned the corner to go to my house and walked out of sight, all in the right direction to my house. But then I see her coming back from where she turned, and she just keeps walking straight, with no pause or looking back, just walking straight towards the wooded area by my house. I'm watching her thinking, what are you doing? And then she just walks straight into the woods. Confusion etched my face. Why would she walk back there? And that was the moment I heard her scream. I immediately panic and start running towards the woods thinking something just happened to her. I remember getting to the edge and being like, hell, I have to go in there and get her. And right as I'm about to walk in, I hear her call my name from behind me. I turned around, and she's standing behind me like, what the hell are you doing staring into those woods? She was very confused, and so was I. I just froze because I had just seen her walk in there. And it wasn't a fleeting walk. I watched her for about 10 seconds, clear as day. It wasn't far away, it wasn't too dark to see, and it all happened. She swears she never went in there, and there was no possible route for her to walk back into the woods and then appear behind me. I obviously would have seen her come out. To this day, we still both get creeped out talking about it, and I have no explanation for what I saw, but it was so real, and we both feel like we avoided something dark. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? I'm a 26-year-old female, and this happened to me and my friends in the summer of 2014 in a very rural area of the Ozark Mountains. I've been trying to rationalize/debate what this was even to this day, and I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks this was, or if anyone else has had this happen to them before. I went to my friend's birthday party in either July or August of 2014. They lived in the country, and you had to travel via dirt roads for quite a few miles to reach their property. Their property consisted of one larger home, a Morton building and a smaller shed. The Morton building has a strange setup, where there was a smaller home inside of it. It's kind of like a two-room building inside a large building, if that makes sense. The plan was to have a party, and then camp for one night on their property using a tent. We had the party, a campfire with hot dogs, and set up our tent a little ways in the woods near the Morton building. In the tent was me, my two friends who we'll call Penny and Megan, and Megan's little sister. The only other people on the property were Megan's grandparents, who were her legal guardians and also in their late 60s. I remember we were playing around with the flashlight we had, and we were making hand puppets on the tent walls. Megan's little sister had fallen asleep by this time. The first odd thing we noticed was a small red dot on the ceiling of the tent. The tent had a mesh top, and we couldn't see the tree branches above it. The red light would slightly move around before disappearing or switching to a different wall of the tent. Of course, we were squealing and moving away from the light, but we were too scared to unzip the tent to look. This continued to happen for maybe 15 minutes. Eventually, so slowly it wasn't immediately noticeable, a vibration sound began around the outside of the tent. At the same time, a red mist surrounded the outside of the tent. After a short amount of time, the red mist and the sound immediately cut off. I didn't realize until it had stopped how loud it had gotten. Now it was completely silent. I remember being terrified, and my friends were silent. We all stayed quiet in the tent, and eventually went to sleep. I remember waking up late in the night to throw up the hot dogs, that I had eaten outside the tent. The next morning we spoke to Megan's grandparents and asked if they had pranked us. They said they didn't and never brought it up again. I couldn't understand how they would have made that vibration if it were a prank. Do you think it was just an elaborate prank? Or could it have been something far more insidious? This happened a few years ago. For context, I live in northeast Oklahoma. So to get to and from work, I have to take highways that don't have much around for decent stretches of road. I closed at work later than normal due to the restaurant hosting an event. As a bartender, I'm no stranger to late night closes, and I decided to take the slightly longer way home that night, since the other, faster highway had pretty bad construction going on. About halfway home, I hit a stretch of highway that passes through some of the local woods, before hitting the next get-off ramps for the next town. Up on the side of the road, I saw a broken down red truck. It was an older model, probably an 80s Ford or something like that. Standing next to the road facing away from me was this woman. She was standing so close to the road, almost in the lane I was driving in, that I had to swerve to not hit her. She had dark, maybe black hair down past her shoulders. She was wearing a white dress that ran down to her shins and dirty, ankle-high boots. She was holding something, but at that moment I couldn't catch what it was, only that it was longer and maybe metallic. Since she was facing the other way, I couldn't see her face. As I swerved to pass her, I got this really odd sensation. When I looked in the mirror to try and see her face and see if she was okay, she was gone. I couldn't even see the truck anymore. After that, I was confused and a little freaked out. I felt weird the whole way home. I've never seen her since, despite taking that road decently often for work. I took that route less after that, though. Does anyone know what this might have been? Was this a real woman, or am I looking too far into it? Or did I encounter something I can't explain on that road at night? The Berkshires have a history of hauntings, UFO sightings, and alien abductions. The Unsolved Mysteries reboot made their first episode about some of those, and of course they're an offshoot of the Appalachian mountain range, so they have all the weirdness associated with that as well. The area is heavily forested, with lots of secluded rich people's houses tucked away into the mountains and long winding roads. There are a couple of cities that barely qualify as cities, lots of quaint Hallmark movie-type suburbs and some distant rural areas, and there are also places with long stretches of road with zero streetlights. And that's in these dark places in between places that I noticed an odd phenomenon. Naked dudes, a lot of them. The first time I saw one, I was driving out of Lee, which is a small suburban town at the mouth of the Mass Pike, with relative civilization. It has a McDonald's and everything. I was driving across a bridge over a small creek, an open field of tall grass to my left, and a row of relatively new-looking nice houses on the right. The houses were pretty spaced apart with large yards, some fenced, some open, no streetlights here, only the lights of the houses and the full moon over the tree line. I was driving slowly to keep an eye out for wildlife when I passed one of the houses with no fence. A large, white, raised ranch with a long gravel driveway, minimal gardening and no outdoor lighting. At the very edge of the front yard, closest to the road, was a man standing still in the darkness. He was buck-ass naked, just nude as the day he was born, staring directly up into the starry night. His neck was at an uncomfortable angle, his posture tense, and he was completely transfixed by whatever he was looking at up there, that he didn't even acknowledge me. He didn't seem to notice my car or headlights on him. He made no move to cover up, and he never even looked at the road. The last I saw of him in my rearview mirror, he was still staring up, far and away, rigid and stock still. This on its own I wouldn't consider paranormal or even that odd. Rich people have rich people drugs, and it was entirely possible that this man was inebriated. The Berkshires are also no stranger to hippies and groups with fringe beliefs. Maybe the dude just wanted to feel the summer night air where the sun didn't shine. Frankly, I wasn't fazed. Part of me wondered if I should go back to see if he needed medical attention, or maybe he hit the ganja up a little too hard. But I was also nervous to approach a stranger in such a vulnerable state. By the time I came back about an hour later, he was gone. Maybe he got chilly, and I didn't think anything of it until I saw the next one, and the next one, and the one after that. All over that summer and fall, I would regularly drive past dark places with random naked men just standing still, watching the sky with their hog out. They were always alone, never in groups. Some would be in what appeared to be their own yards or driveways, but others would be in random places where there were no houses at all, be it in fields, near forests, or on the sides of small highways, or tucked deep into wooded side streets. Some were even so bold as to be in the cemetery, in a closed veterinarian's office parking lot, and at one time brazenly in front of Burger King that was still open and serving. They varied in age, some appearing to be in their 30s all the way to their 70s. Most were white, many had scruffy facial hair with large beards, some were tall, some were short. Basically, most of them seemed like your average everyday dude. Just one bizarre hobby in common. And the thing I can say is that I never saw the same man twice. It still vexes me trying to figure out what they were looking at. Sometimes Starlink passes by or the ISS, but we generally have crap visibility of auras, meteor showers and no rocket launches. There's too much light pollution. Many times the moon was either full or close to, and it was only by that light that I could see them in at all. It was just so odd how completely transfixed they were. Nothing existed to them outside of the stars, not their nakedness, not witness. Not the danger of being too close to a road in the dark with traffic going by. I know it's not exactly paranormal itself, but I've seen and heard things in the Berkshires, and given its history of UFO sightings and even abductions, I can't help but wonder if somehow it's all connected. What do these men know that compels them to wander outside in the dark and flash their neighbors? What are they so fixated on in the night sky, to the exclusion of all else? Why did they seem like they were listening to something, receiving a message that I in my clothes could not hear? Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. My voice is slightly better than it was yesterday, still have that pain though, but it's nowhere near as intense, and I thought I'd just try to record and ended up managing to do the whole video. Thank you all so much for your support though, it really does mean a lot, and your comments down in the last video. I am trying to take care of my health, but I appreciate everyone popping in and leaving the comments to begin with, so thank you. I'd like to extend one final thanks as always to the members and patrons whose names you can see on screen. These amazing people do get some exclusive content, just maybe not this week given the throat, or I might just do it tomorrow if I get the green light and feel better. But yes, if you would like some of that, links down below. But I'm going to sign off for now. Stay awesome guys, and good night.